I saved her.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 1. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek. Joining us also, he's going to be joining us not necessarily for all of these, but probably for at least a couple of them, at least a few. He's the co-host of the video game podcast DLC. He also hosted the official Last of Us podcast, which is available on the recently released Last of Us Part 2 remastered for PC and PS5. And of course, you probably know him best as my co-host here on Decoding TV when we covered Season 1 of The Last of Us. Christian Spicer, welcome back to Decoding TV.
I'm stoked. I'm ready for Season 2. We're in it, gentlemen. It's happened. We're here.
We are in it. Boy, lots happened in our lives, in the world, since the last season of The Last of Us. And so has it happened in the lives of these characters as well. It's been a big time jump. So we're going to get into it. And I do want to mention before we get started, we are going to talk about all of the events that happened in The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 1 on HBO. We will spoil it. We will not spoil anything from the games. Let's talk about our overall thoughts on the first episode. Christian Spicer, let's start with you. What did you think of the Season 2 premiere of The Last of Us?
I maybe came in with too high of expectations. Folks that listened to our recap last year know I love this franchise. I love Season 1. I love the games. They hold a very, very special place in my heart. And I guess succinctly, I think this first episode was a little uneven. I think there's a lot of promise for where this season is going to go. But watching just that, whatever it was, 59 minutes of this episode, yeah, I thought it was a little uneven. There were parts that I loved, and then there were parts that I thought felt out of place, I guess is the best way to put it. And the other thing that jumped out at me is it feels like this season is going to be bigger. HBO gave them a bigger budget. You know, it feels like everything has the potential to be bigger. And I feel like there were some seams that were being pulled there, where some stuff looked incredible, and then other stuff looked like they were maybe still trying to do too much without having quite enough to pull off the shots they were going for.
You know what it felt like to me, Christian? It felt like a show that is unconcerned with needing to engage its audience. And I don't mean that in necessarily a bad way. Like, there's nothing about this season that's like trying to like hook new viewers, in my opinion, or like, oh, we're going to have something really like typically in many season premieres, like something huge and exciting happens. And yeah, there's some cool set pieces here, but like nothing that's like, oh, you have to keep watching, in my opinion. Instead is, this is a show that is one of the most successful, most viewed shows on television, and they're kind of like, we're going to take our time in telling this story. And I think we will see that borne out over the course of the next 7 episodes, which is how long Season 2 is going to be. Patrick Klepek, curious about your overall thoughts on Season 2 premiere.
I'm hoping I can settle into the show a little bit more as we go along, because David, you and I have talked about in the lead up to Season 2, I'm not going to spoil anything about what happens in the game. We were upfront about that. But nonetheless, you and I had very strong opinions on the story of Season 2. And I've been very interested to see how they approach, both from Neil Druckmann, the chief creative on The Last of Us Part 2 especially.
Yeah,
how does he approach?
Who is intimately involved in the creation of the show.
Is directing an episode this season, is like works very closely with Craig Mazin. This is not a adaptation made without deep input from the original creatives. It is hand in hand. What does it mean to go back to that world? What does it mean to like do a second kind of round at that story? And because of my kind of profoundly negative reaction to The Last of Us Part 2, I'm like spending so much time thinking about like, well, what are they going to do differently this time? Like, how are they going to approach this? And what I'll say is, about halfway through, I was reminded how much I fucking love so many of the actors in the show, how much I like about what they bring to their performances that is in line with the exceptional performances from both of those games, regardless of how you feel about the storytelling in Part 2. There were exceptional performances from many of the actors portraying them digitally in this video game that you played. And they bring like real different, interesting nuances to this adaptation. And I missed that. I missed hanging out with these characters. But I will say the thought I had at the end, which is a similar sort of thought that Christian just had, and my wife shared. My wife doesn't play video games, is hooked into the show because of the show. I turned to her after telling her repeatedly over the last 2 years, please do not Google anything about the second season of the show. I implore you. It will be so easy to ruin some of the ride for yourself. I said, what did you make of it? And she's like, well, I'm tired because we had a long birthday weekend for our daughter, but also that seemed like a lot. And Last of Us Part 2 is, however you feel about it, is a lot. And I remain curious, interested, slightly skeptical at their ability to pull that off in the second season. But man, sold on Dina, sold on so many different things. Like I'm engaged, and I do want to see where they go with it.
I do just want to emphasize what Patrick Klepek said about the spoilers that you might be exposed to if you are not familiar with Last of Us Part 2, the video game. The Ringer actually wrote an entire article about this called "What Does Spoiler Culture Look Like Now? The Last of Us is Where We Find Out." End quote. And it's essentially about, like, there are some major events in The Last of Us Part 2 that one could consider to be massive spoilers, and millions of people already know what happens. I think it's going to be similar to like a Game of Thrones scenario where like it's up to the fans to protect the viewers. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I think people are being pretty, because obviously I know what's happening. So sometimes I'll click on, like, the way Max has been promoting this after the fact is like different GIFs and stuff like that. And I'll click on them just to see, like, how is the audience that knows they're cued in on story beats treating outsiders that are kind of like intermingling. It's a lot of like emojis that like gesture at like certain story beats. I think right now people are being pretty chill about it, but it is viewer beware. Like, I would be very careful about the sources that you are like, don't click on social media. Like, people are going to spoil things for you that you would rather experience yourself in the course of the story, in the same way that Game of Thrones, like, just pick who you want to watch us, you want to read others, pick those people, and like try to stick to that, and just be careful out there on social media.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's any adaptation, though. You know, Hunger Games. You mentioned Game of Thrones already. Harry Potter. You know, there are major twists and turns in the Harry Potter franchise, and those books were out for years before the film came out.
Yeah,
and maybe the internet was in a different place. So I don't think like that's necessarily something new. What I do think is perhaps new for this particular season of television is the first season showed us that they were willing to subvert expectations. And I don't know what they're going to do here, but I wouldn't be surprised if they find a way to delight and surprise even the hardcore fans of the game. I wouldn't be surprised if they use this as an opportunity, like you mentioned, Dave, to re-examine or go back to what this thing is. I don't know. I don't think we're going to have like huge changes, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tweak that in a way to elicit the emotion from the viewer that they want.
I would have more confidence that, and just to be clear, right? Like, Patrick and I both were not fans of The Last of Us Part 2, the video game in general. Christian Spicer obviously was. That's where we're coming at this from. I would be more confident in what you're saying, Christian, if Neil Druckmann wasn't so intimately involved. It would be one thing if like he was just not even involved at all, and
it was all Craig Mazin.
All Craig Mazin could like take it in his own direction. But with him being super involved, and he seems to like the way he's talked about it in interviews, he like signs off on creative changes from the game, or at least like agrees to them or is aligned with them. I'm really curious what they're going to change, if anything. But they already have changed some things, and we'll talk about the.
I would say those changes have already been fairly substantive in terms of
tone. Shockingly substantive.
Yes, and we can get into all that and we'll both get into that here and not get into it here. It's like how far you travel with us is like how spoiler we get about what that ends up being.
All right, so overall, solid episode. I think they brought the world to life really well, and I think the cast is great.
It's a lot of table setting, right?
A lot of table setting. That's how I feel about it. A lot of table setting. So nothing that I'm like, oh, you got to go see the thing because you got to go see the premiere because this, like nothing like that really. But there's solid episode.
There's one big thing that is set up, and maybe because of the way it's set up in the episode, it's kind of the bookend to the episode, right? It kind of opens and closes the episode. I think that is the thing, right? That is the locomotive. That is the steam engine that is coming at the rest of it is this safety. The audio cue you played at the beginning of this episode, right? Is what is this? This is our town. This is what's outside. and this season premiere is like, we're spending a lot of time outside, you know? So I think that is the fuse that has been lit.
Yeah.
That makes you want to come back next week.
Let's get into it. Let's talk about what actually happens. I do want to point out that none of us, I believe, has screeners for this. So we're like watching the show live and then talking about it shortly afterwards. HBO actually denied the screener request, which, like, usually they just don't respond, but like they actually just gave me an email. They were like, "No, sorry."
I can't tell if that's better. Like, is it a sign of respect to get the no? I think it is.
Yeah. They're like, we can't trust you to be in the pocket of big old HBO. Anyway, whatever.
Did they take you down to a storage closet and make you sit there for a few minutes first?
Anyway, my point being, like, people should not assume we have any future knowledge of the episodes. That's the only thing I was going to say. Okay. As the episode begins, we get a quick flashback to the final shot of season 1, in which Joel promises Ellie he didn't murder a bunch of people to save Ellie's life. And I just want to give a shout out to HBO because I don't know if you guys watched the previously on segment. Like, it recaps the entire first season.
Yes, I watched the one they put out on YouTube and the one they put out ahead of the episode because my wife requested it.
right. So that was a pretty, like, solid previously on, like, pretty well done. And then they get to the end of the previously on and they don't show the final shot of the first season. And I was like, well, that's pretty consequential. I don't know why they left that out of the previously on. And then immediately the episode begins and it's the final shot of the first season. And I was like, oh, I see you, HBO. Well done. Because they don't want to, like, repeat that scene again. So I was like, that's pretty brilliant. That's a pretty good, like, and it reminds you of, like, what happened and what's at stake here and so on. So I appreciated that.
I believe that was actually extra material shot during season 1 that then they repurposed to like kind of bring you into season 2.
Because I believe the shot in season 1 ends with her saying okay and then cut to black.
Correct.
Yeah. And then in this shot, it's slightly different. She, like, walks away from the camera and so on.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. So then we meet a group of Fireflies, including Abby, Nora, Owen, and others. These people are all connected to the people Joel killed at the end of season 1. We don't know exactly what their connections or friendships or relationships are at this point. But they are out for revenge, and Abby in particular is determined to kill Joel painfully and slowly. But they don't have any resources right now, so they agree to meet up with a guy named Isaac in Seattle who can hopefully help them and get them deeper into the Firefly group and so on. And that's kind of where their story in this early segment ends until the very end of the episode. Cut to the opening credits. Before we get to any of that, I am curious, like, really hard to talk about Abby without talking about her character in the game, but I am curious if you had any reaction to this opening scene with them.
I feel like this was the first moment, and the episode corrects is the weird word. My fears went away as the episode continued, but this opening scene looked a little CW-ish to me. I don't know. Something about the kids, they were talking very sad. We had all these grave markers, like something terrible had just happened, but they looked pretty clean. They looked... it just felt tonally off. I think the rest of the show in season 1 didn't have that problem. And I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening here exactly. Like, I don't know what they're trying to say because they didn't look beat up. So like a bunch of people died that they tried to save and they weren't able to. And now they're hell bent.
Able to save any of them. All of them. They weren't able to save, apparently.
Yeah. And now they're hell bent on revenge, but they all looked fine. Like perfectly okay. And I'm not sure if that was an intentional juxtaposition of where they were when this happened or not. But I honestly, I was a little concerned during that scene as to maybe the tone or style of the show. And then I feel like the rest of the show was very lived in. But that was my gut reaction to that cold open.
They don't look like they just finished 15 hours at the pit,
Yeah, right.
And that's a little bit odd. Patrick, any thoughts on the Abby clan before we get going with the rest of the episode?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that's because we're sort of like, we lack the juxtaposition to what they went through, right? Like I was sort of waiting in this moment. Are we getting any sort of, is this going to be intercut with flashbacks to them like trying to save people, to Joel like running through the hospital and gunning everyone down? We don't really, if you didn't watch the like previously on, you don't get any of that, and you're just sort of dropped in with a bunch of characters that you have no context for, you have no relationship with, and depending
and who
on
weren't there in the
right, they weren't there, which is the nature of Last of Us Part 2. And this will be one of many things I'm interested to see how they juggle, especially given the fact they've already announced it's going to be several seasons long, at least 2 adapting Part 2. It's a much bigger story. There are lots of characters. Joel and Ellie remain central and important, but they are not the entire world of this story.
Mm-hmm.
And that has pluses, that has minuses. And I think this is an early example of the show trying to juggle the weight of the game, which is we are now going to have a rapidly expanded cast. We have to try and justify and explain why they're here. And the video game chooses a very specific narrative framing to accomplish that. David, you and I always talked about, like, I don't know that the show can do that. And like from the jump, the show goes, well, we're not going to do that. And I'm not going to get into how all that works, but the shorthand of it is in the show's adaptation of the video game, you are getting hints and reasons for Abby's motivations to be in the story very early. That is something that happens in a much different way in the video game. And I think that leads to some of the, like, it feels sort of clumsy, but I'm sort of willing to give the show some rope to, like, this is an ambitious narrative to begin with. And so some things feeling a little clumsy while the pieces come into place, I'm okay with. Plus, I really like the actor that they've picked for Abby, like aesthetic, like differences aside of like how she is depicted in the game versus the actor they've picked here. I love Caitlin Dever, and like I expect her to give a powerhouse performance. And there's enough here that I'm like, I can see where we're going, and I'm willing to give this rope, and I want to see where it goes from here. But I'm with Christian that it felt a little bit clumsy because it does have the feeling of just like,
right,
like characters
who are these
screen.
people? Like, all these people were they're just off screen, like supporting the Fireflies at the end of the first season, without you seeing them. It's like the Nathan Fielder meme of like, all my friends are just I'm hanging out with all my friends, they're just off screen laughing with me. Like, okay, yeah, fine, I guess. It's interesting they didn't do more to set it up. I guess like because they hadn't cast any of these people by the end of season 1, but they knew that this is where it would go, right?
Right.
So they could have like put some, but they hadn't cast them yet. That was the problem. So anyway, all right. So that's what happens with we meet Abby, Nora, and Owen, and some others. Cut to opening credits, same opening credits as before. 5 years later, we are in Jackson, Wyoming. There's this whole settlement of humans that have found a town and a community. And we see Ellie training with someone named Caleb. Now, it's supposed to make it look like they're actually fighting. I don't think any of us thought that for a second. And she gets really pissed when she finds out that they pulled punches because they didn't want to deal with Joel's wrath, because Joel is kind of her father figure at this point, and he's a well-respected elder in the town, and they don't want to accidentally hurt Ellie and injure her. And she gets really, really pissed.
Don't do that again.
She leaves the training facility, barn, wherever they are, and the camera tilts upward. We see the whole town, and then it says written for television and directed by Craig Mazin, which I thought was a nice flex. He's like gonna save that credit until we're like looking over the whole vista of the town.
Look at this. Look what I made.
Look what I made. Look at my creation. Anyway. We also see a scene with Joel fixing some breakers, and he talks with Ellie's best friend, Dina. It's clear that Ellie is pissed at Joel. We don't understand exactly why. Joel doesn't want Dina to tell people that he's in therapy. That's the thing that comes up. He's in therapy with a woman named Gail. At one point, Joel says that he's not responsible for someone else's emotional state. I don't know if you guys know this, but I've been reading this book about the philosophy of Adler. Like, have you guys heard of this guy? He's kind of up there, theoretically up there with like Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. The book is called The Courage to be Disliked: How to Free Yourself, Change Your Life, and Achieve Real Happiness. This is like an international bestseller. It sold millions of copies. I think it's very good. And one of the concepts in the book is called the separation of tasks. It's this idea that like you are only responsible for your own emotional state, and like you cannot be responsible for other people's emotional state. So anyway, just appreciate that Joel's taken some psychological concepts, applying them to his own life. Now, there's an open question of whether Joel would actually do that. And, you know, the Joel that we know would actually. Do you guys think Joel would actually go to therapy? What do you guys think?
I think with this 5-year gap, right? I mean,
Yeah.
We're shown this town, they're working on the town and themselves, I think. You know, there's only so much you can do. And so I would hope he would seek reflection. I also really liked the way, well, one, Dina, oh my gosh, just a force, right? Like, what an awesome introduction on this show. What an awesome character. I was immediately drawn in. She seemed cool, calm, collected, but also like willing to poke Joel, which we just heard other people weren't. You know, like she has permission to needle him in a way that others don't. I thought that was great. And I think that Joel would. You know, we've had this in season 1. We had that excellent scene with Joel and Tommy at the bar, the restaurant, wherever they were. And, you know, wrestling with who he is and what he's done. And I think there's more there that he would pick to explore, you know? I don't know. I buy it.
I mean, one of the core differences, The Last of Us, the adaptation of season 1 is in many ways pretty straightforward and in other ways like different in some important ways. And I would argue that The Last of Us as a video game, The Last of Us Part 2 as a video game are much more nihilistic than the television adaptation. And you could argue that's pulling punches, or you could argue it's like being more human. And I think having Joel talk to a therapist is in line with the decision the first season makes about like the Bill character. Like your encounter with Bill in the video game is far different than the one that is depicted in the show. And it's one that like allows the space for a much more nuanced human character. They're much bleaker interpretations of the character of Bill based on the segment that you experience in the video game. And so I'm not surprised. I feel like this is very, you know, I can't speak to it specifically. I haven't read any interviews but this feels, whether it's a Druckmann reflection or the influence of working with someone like Craig Mazin, is like imbuing a little more introspective humanity into the show that I think was present in the first season and is sort of like singularly responsible for the like presence of someone like Joel, who's not someone who speaks his feelings. It's like, how do you get to that part of the character in a show like this? Well, a therapist at least is one way to get in there.
Yeah. Indeed. Joel has an argument with Tommy's wife, Maria, who helps run the place, and she's on the same council as Joel. They're talking about whether to welcome in more refugees. Joel doesn't want to because they're running out of resources, but Maria reminds him that he was once a refugee too. We also meet Maria and Tommy's son, Benji. But yeah, I mean, I think that one of the key ideas of season 1 is Joel protecting his own, right? And he obviously has made that part of his life philosophy. Is like, we got to protect our own. If we don't have enough resources, we got to protect our own. I think that is going to be one of the main themes of the season, and like how that conflicts or creates problems or taken to its logical extreme can cause issues. So I'm glad we're seeing it seated a little bit here. But anyway, Joel goes to meet Gail, who is a therapist. She's played by Catherine O'Hara in a role that she typically doesn't play. I would say is a very dramatic role, very different role. It's Gail's birthday, but she's sad because her husband's no longer around. It's the first time he's not around for her birthday in over 40 years. Anyway, the session starts. Joel complains that Dina treats her better than Ellie, but then Gail gets super pissed that Joel isn't telling her the full truth. She also reveals that Joel was the one who killed her husband, and she's pretty angry about that. She can't let that go. So now that she's spoken her truth, she asks Joel to tell her the whole truth, and Joel kind of starts crying, starts tearing up, and he decides he's not going to continue, and he leaves. And he tells Gail, "I didn't hurt her, I saved her." And that's kind of where things are left. Gail is a whole new character, not in the video game. This is a whole kind of new setup for Joel. Chris and Spicer, curious, what did you think of Gail as a character and how this scene played out?
I really liked Gale as a character. I mean, I'm very biased to the actor playing Gale. So, talk about just incredible. And I thought, as you said, Dave, like she's playing this nuanced, dramatic role here. And I thought she did great. I also really liked the framing of this scene and the way that Craig and the DPs and everybody in the crew put it together. Because we are tight on these people. We are tight on her and Joel, and we are just sitting with them, right? This isn't a Kevin Smith style therapy scene where people are constantly talking and there's always talking happening, and talking is going to keep happening because that's how we're saying what's happening is we're talking. Like we really sit with them in these moments.
It is a tight close-up where you're looking, the character's looking directly into camera, which is not generally doesn't happen on TV, let alone in this show. So it's a very interesting style that they're using to shoot this.
Yeah, almost always a 1. I think there's maybe a couple of establishing shots where it's a 2, but very tight on them. And you hold there with them, especially when, she finally confronts Joel and asks him to speak his truth, and we sit there on him. I thought it was super effective in getting a lot of information out in a way that I think is setting up story that's going to pay off later. The idea that Joel killed her husband, that he had to do it, that she knows he had to do it, but she still hates him for it. I think that says a lot about who Joel is as a person in this community. Does the hard stuff, carries that burden with him, or is often put in those situations. And then his reaction to it, again, we saw Joel sensitive in season 1, but only when he thought he was alone. And seeing him even open up that little bit to Gale there, I think shows perhaps the man he's trying to become, and whether or not Jackson, Wyoming will let him, I think is fascinating.
Patrick, any thoughts?
Well, I mean, part of, I think, what the interesting pacing of the first episode is that so much of the first season is defined by external threats,
right?
Like coming down on Joel and Ellie. Like it is either
it's a
the
road
monsters
movie.
of the human monsters, or the actual literal monsters buried under the ground or hiding around the corner. And here, like Jackson, at least for the moment, obviously it gets very ominous towards the end, is like, yeah, like there are monsters outside the gate, and there might be monsters in here too with us in the form of humans. But like, like Jackson itself is a form of therapy. It's an opportunity to live a semi-normal life where your emotional state is not defined by death around the corner. It actually gives you space to like breathe, think for yourself, have more complex emotional reactions. And that is something that as a television show, they're exploring to a degree that is just like was not happening as much like in the like these sequences depicted in the video game, to a degree that I think is doing a lot of heavy work to emotionally set the stage for whatever set pieces will unfold over the course of the season. But it's introspection that I think is well earned, and like I think leans into the best parts of like, if you're going to make this a TV show, don't do it like in many ways it feels shot for shot. Like it's not as though it's like grand, like feels like grand departures, but I do think it's an adaptation that understands what's important about the medium and what advantage it does have. And I think sequences like this like speak to the people involved understanding that and taking advantage of it.
Well said. All right. We have some scenes with Ellie. Ellie sniping with Joel's brother Tommy. But during this conversation, we learn she's getting put on gate watch. She wants to be on patrol. And after bothering Tommy about it a bunch, he relents. It becomes clear that they're not supposed to tell anyone that she has immunity. She kind of jokes about that.
I got bit, everybody!
Hey.
I got bit!
Hey!
I'm immune!
Whoa.
Later, Dina picks up Ellie for them to go on patrol. It's the Alpine Run. They're supposed to go down Route 191 down to Hoback. I looked it up. Hoback is 13 miles away from Jackson. So it's a 13-mile trek down and back up. So it's like, that's pretty substantial. That's
it's a day trip, even with the horses. Like, yeah.
I think it's actually okay to take a pause for a moment here and say that I gotta say the character of Ellie in the show is different than in the video game at this point. My sense is that she is a little bit older in the video game. And I have to say, I feel like she is more of an kind of an annoying teenager in the show. In a way that I found kind of off-putting, because it's one thing when it's just her and Joel and she's kind of being being sarcastic with him or whatever, like that's fine. But like now they're in like a community where literally their actions have consequences for other people, and I found it to be a little bit more challenging to take how flippant she's being with like all the rules. Like and that's kind of acknowledged in this episode when they have to show up at the council later, but like I don't know, I'm not a fan so far of how the Ellie character is being portrayed, which I think is different and less mature than in the game. And I'm curious if you guys feel that way or if it's just me. What do you guys think? Patrick Klepek?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the parent in me speaking, but like in watching this, I felt like I was just getting a glimpse of my own future.
Your own future.
You know, I've got 2 daughters myself, much younger, 8 and 5. But I mean, this is a girl who has never been allowed to grow up, right?
Mhm.
Like, and we don't know what happened to these 5 years, but one can imagine, again, like speaking to my previous point, Jackson was an opportunity to actually grow up. Now, maybe what's happening in 5 years is like what like a teenager in normal society gets to do over the course of like a decade, and it's a little truncated, which means it's going to be messier. But I think the show, I think if you're annoyed, David, I think the show is going to go mission accomplished. Like, I think the show wants friction between you and Ellie. I think the show wants you to ally yourself with Joel, like in the same way. Like, I think it's positioned almost in a parental point of view, which is like, you dipshit. Like, why don't you like, I don't understand why you have to. Like, we don't have to be best friends, but I don't understand why you're acting this way. And I think the show doesn't necessarily want you to like Ellie all the time. And I think that tension is something the show is picking at over and over, because I think that is going to end up bearing fruit later. And so I think it wants Ellie to be kind of unlikable or prickly, or like, and I think that lines up neatly with all the complications that Joel is going through personally, trying to figure out what his role is as a pseudo parental figure.
Christian, I saw you nodding in agreement. You feel the same way?
I do. I think it speaks to the idea of recklessness and safety. It's a version of the suburban teen shooting bottle rockets at their friends or something, where it's like you're in this world of perceived safety. And even with the clickers and, the infected that are out there, Ellie, in this moment that we're meeting her, feels immortal, whether or not she's immune. Because Dina, I think, also has that. They have this teenage, we're going to live forever. And it feels a little weird for us because their world is so foreign to ours. But I think if you've grown up in that world, that is the world
right?
With those monsters existing, that is a very real truth for them. And, in the council meeting, I don't want to jump all the way ahead, but we see that again there too. After they kind of get their talking to, they're still a little flippant with when they walk out of that room. I loved that. Just there's like a subtle look between the two of them when they leave that room. And I really think it is trying to position them as real people, but also as people that, you're not supposed to necessarily like in this instance.
Do you guys agree with me that like it's different from the game, right? Because I've played the first parts of the game, and Ellie is not quite this recalcitrant, I don't think.
Well, and also, like, again, we'll get into more specifics in this in the next segment, but like, things are things are happening at a glacial pace in the television show relative to the storytelling in the video game. And your mileage may vary on that. We'll have to see how the season pans out. Like, one man's padding is another man's like using television's space for characterization. So far, I think they're setting up characterization. I think they're using the time wisely. And I think setting up Ellie as like having real friction with Joel and the audience before things kick off, like in whichever direction like the show chooses to take that. It's setting up the emotional stakes just very differently than the game. Like there is a inciting event in the video game, right? And it is clear that the show is taking a different tact, either on its way towards that event, and how long it takes to get there. And I'm enjoying their time spent there so far. And I think Ellie's friction with Joel and the audience is a very conscious one. I think this feels like intentional on the storyteller's part. It's like, we really want you to understand that, a lot of this, I think, is kind of truncated in the first episode to this is 5 years of storytelling.
Right.
We need you to be annoyed kind of fast,
Yeah,
and realize how different she is, before we get to the other stuff.
So Ellie and Dina charge into a supermarket and they kill one of the clickers in there, but the other one attacks Ellie and actually does so in a very sophisticated fashion, ends up biting Ellie. There's actually a very cool scene later when she cuts open the wound. Very brutal. But I think it's to basically disguise the fact that she's been bitten. Which I just thought was a cool, because that doesn't happen in the game at all. I don't think. It's a very neat touch of and I think that's the third time she's been bitten during the show, if I recall correctly. So it seems to be a somewhat regular problem. Anyway, later back at the settlement, Dina and Ellie appear before the council to defend their actions and report on the smart clicker. And it's oh, maybe these things are getting smarter. Maybe they're more aware, whatever's going on. Maria's worried. We also learned that 6 clickers took down a bear at some point in the past. So they can coordinate. They can organize. They're deadly. I assume that's going to have consequences later in the season. All right, what else happens this episode? Not that much else. Joel and Ellie exchange an awkward moment before the Happy New Year celebration. We're reminded that the year it currently is 2029. And at the celebration, Ellie and Dina dance and kiss. A conservative guy calls them a bad word, and then Joel comes in just out of nowhere, shoves him to the ground. Ellie is very unhappy with Joel that he did this and kind of storms off. And then in the final shots of the episode, we see that the pipes underneath the town have some cordyceps there. And we also learn that Abby, with her band, is nearby Jackson, Wyoming. They see lights in the distance. We assume that's Jackson. She has found Joel, we assume, and she is going to do something about it. So those are some of the events that happened towards the latter half of the episode. Kind of a bummer that bigotry is still a thing even in the post-apocalyptic universe, really, you guys don't have more to focus on, during this time, but whatever.
In some ways, can you view in the same way that Ellie has the space and the emotional space to explore who she is as a person, is you know what? I'm safe enough here in Jackson. I'd forgotten all about that bigotry stuff, but I think I'm going to take that back up. I think I hate gay people again. You know what? Jackson is a tapestry, and it's so safe that people feel safe enough to be bigots again.
Yeah. Yes. That's a good, because when you're fighting off zombies, there's no time for the bigotry, right? But
no, we're not in the foxhole anymore.
Once you're relatively safe, it's okay, let me let that rip again.
They're screening movies,
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, any other thoughts on kind of those final scenes of the episode? I am curious, what do you guys think about how this ballroom scene plays out and anything like that? I will just say that it is an extremely faithful recreation of what is in the game. The very similar scene happens in the game, and it's extremely faithfully recreated here in the movie. And apparently they also built this set in real life, and they brought games journalists there when the game came out. Were either of you part of that?
Oh, not for the show. They did the E3
for the video
press
game,
conference. Yeah,
they did a reveal where they brought you into this barn or church or whatever.
Yeah, years ago.
Yeah, years
that
ago.
Was part of the line queue, right, to get into the press conference, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
You walked through some themed rooms, and one of those was this prior to this. Beginning of the first trailer for Last of Us Part 2. This moment is important to that first reveal.
Yeah. I loved these last scenes. I mentioned the unevenness and how I think the show is trying to be bigger. There's a moment when Ellie and Dina, when that group rides out of Jackson to go on patrol, and they open the gates and close the gates, and that just looked like a stitched together scene to me. Like, it didn't look like a real place.
Mhm.
It's like, we have these horses, we have this green screen, we get a fence in, and that to me made me a little concerned about what they're trying to go for, perhaps in this season as it becomes bigger. Excuse me. But those small moments, I think it still just nails, absolutely nails. I mean, the rage in Ellie's face when Joel comes in and just bulldozes this bigot. And then, oh my gosh, the final emotional scene, not that kind of stinger of we find out that Abby's there looming, but Joel is sitting there on the porch playing this guitar that, I don't want to put too much of myself into this as a parent, but like, he's communicating to her through, right? Ellie's kind of discarded it. We saw that earlier in the episode. He comes in, he's like, "Oh, you playing it?" She's like, "Yeah, whatever, Dad. Get the hell out of my room." And he's like, "No, I'll fix it for you. You don't need to do that." And he's like, "It's like, I'm gonna fix it because this is gonna fix us." Like, if you let me, I can see like when the carburetor starts, you will love me. Just like this very real, misguided, but he's freaking trying. And there he is. He thought he helped her, and I'm going to get emotional. He thought he helped her in at the dance, and he doesn't have anything to do, so he's trying to connect with her through this guitar. And she walks up and she sees him, and you have this moment of like, she gets it, and then she's just like, "No, you suck. This sucks. This is your fault." All with just like, Bella's look, just beautiful. And that is like, that's this show to me, right? Like those moments, that's what I want. I mean, I don't, because I cry like, pig being slaughtered, but like, that's what I'm here for.
The one thing that sticks out to me at the end of the episode, I'm unfamiliar with the actor portraying Dina.
Isabella Merced.
What else has she been in? Like,
she was recently in Alien Romulus. Did a great job in that.
Oh,
movie
right.
as well.
She was okay. All right.
Isn't she?
She was also in Sicario, Day of the Soldado. Like she's been in many things. She has 6 million Instagram followers. She's already kind of a big deal. She was Dora the Explorer in
I think she's hot
Dora
girl
and the Lost
too.
City of Gold.
Upcoming hot girl.
That was like one of my takeaways. Like, put aside like all my thoughts on last. It was like, wow, I'm looking at a superstar. Like,
Yeah,
I like this.
absolutely.
Like, I feel like this season is gonna be not like you said. She has 6 million followers. Like, but this
3.7 million. Sorry. 3.7.
Okay, well,
Never mind.
It's not that impressive. But she is electric, and Dina in the game is a little more muted, a little less animated, and I don't think this is a break from how Dina is portrayed in the video game at all. I think it speaks to like the latitude that the creatives and the script and then the actors and their performances are giving them a chance to like, hey, this is the character, but also make it your own. And I think, man, she just ignites off the screen. Like, it's like, again, for all my concerns in the game and the adaptation of the game of like core to this is like the adventures of two people and the characters they run into. Part 2 is more of an ensemble, but boy, like, every time Dina's not on the screen in episode 1 of this season, I'm like, I think Dina should be back on the screen, frankly. I mean, that little exchange they have, like, setting up when they go into the grocery store and they're just, like, goofing with one another with, like, hand signals and their knives. Like, I would kill to just, like, see the behind the scene. Like, it feels like they were just screwing around with one another for probably, like, hours on end, like, stitched together, like the couple of moments we get there. But they have such a chemistry with one, like they instantly sell their relationship. And like, it's one episode and you go from like a character we've never met to their kissing to now, well, I think they're in love and should get married. And I'm like, I'm there by the end of the first episode. And I think that really speaks to, Bella Thorne really speaks to like, it speaks to all these, what's the Ellie's actor's name?
Bella Ramsey.
Like they're just like both electric and like really just sell everything about them. And if this season is going to work, if this adaptation is going to work, a lot of it rests on the shoulders of those two, and we'll see where the rest goes. But I just want to see them on screen and bounce off one another because they were a real highlight in an episode that, I think, as I characterized it earlier, feels like a lot of table setting and asking for patience from the audience, but I think it's time well spent, and that is in great part because of, I think, the terrific acting for Dina in particular.
I think it depends. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead.
Also, how fresh you're coming into this, because I think it's a tinderbox for Ellie and Riley. You know, like, again, The Last of Us season 1 is not a show of good things happening to good people necessarily. And the last time this show gave us something like that for Ellie was Riley. If you're coming off a fresh rewatch of season 1, I love Dina too, but I don't know if Dina makes it out of episode 2 the way the show sets up characters we love.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is fair. Everyone's on the table.
I think they like nailed the casting in general. Like young Mazzino playing Jesse. I was like, I was like, holy shit, that guy look. Now I don't actually think they look that close together in appearance. But when I first saw him, I was like, is that guy just the guy from the game? You know, like that was my first reaction. Then when you look at them side by side, it's like they're actually not that similar. But I think the casting is excellent this season so far. And so I'm excited about where this season is going to take us and the discourse that it's going to generate. I'm so grateful to be able to talk about it today with you two gentlemen. Be sure to check out Christian Spicer's podcast, DLC, wherever your podcast can be found. And check out the Last of Us podcast on the actual copy of the video game you can get of The Last of Us Part 2. Christian Spicer, thank you so much for joining us today on Decoding TV.
It's my pleasure. Don't listen to that podcast if you want to be unspoiled for the show, though.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.